It is Indiana in the Morning, presented by First Commonwealth Bank. It's WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160. And Indiana County Commissioner Sherene Hess is with us this morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Todd. How are you?
Wonderful. It's good to have you in the studio with us once more.
Thank you.
So the PA Budget and Policy Center, they do these budget summits. Are they geared, because this is the second one you've attended,
Yes.
Are they geared toward county budgets and things of that nature, or what's the focus of them?
So I am happy to share some information about the PA Budget and Policy Center. And I just wanted to say that I'm here on my own. I'm not representing any group or anything like that. I'm just here as an elected official who wants to learn more about how our state and federal budgets work. Because we do, as county government, we do make decisions every day related to delivery of services, human services, children and youth services, public safety, emergency management, community development, economic development, and all of these things depend on an adequate state funding and federal funding as well. So I'm always, and so are my colleagues, always paying attention to our state budget. So I'm very interested in how the budget works, and we got a really nice understanding of this organization puts on a nice presentation on the different components of it and what the priorities are and so on, and those kinds of things. So it's very, very, feel like I'm much more informed about the budget.
Yeah. And so this is the second one that you've attended.
Yes.
And you point out you did this on your own, just as a sort of an educational effort for yourself.
Yes, and my friends from the League of Women Voters were there too. They have a children's advocacy committee, and I'm happy to say Indiana County. I mean, this is a statewide initiative that draws from all over the state, and I think Indiana was nicely represented. And they're looking at how the state budget impacts education funding, and especially public education. So they were there as well, and we heard lots of detail, and also an overview. And some of the highlights in the overview that we heard is, and this is Governor Wolf's proposed budget. Of course, it has to go through lots of other steps now, but it's a fairly austere budget. It's about a 3% increase, which is not too bad. It's a budget that has no broad-based tax increases, but it does have a proposal for a modest severance tax. And most importantly to a lot of us is it's a budget that invests in public education, in higher education, in workforce development, and also worker training, because we have a situation, really, believe it or not, where there are many more jobs than there are skilled folks to take those jobs. It's also a budget that invests in fighting the opioid epidemic, which, of course, is very important to all of us, and a budget that invests in human services, including for families who are dealing with members with intellectual disabilities.
From those groups who were there, and I'm sure there were many others in county government that had questions, one of the things that has become a real issue for counties, and you experience it here, is the unfunded mandates, which is a term that maybe a lot of people don't understand, but it's when a county or an entity, a municipality, is required to do something by a higher body, the state or the federal government, but then having required them to do that, they don't send them any money to do it with. And that's rough, isn't it?
It's very difficult, and not only do you have unfunded mandates, but then you have your current levels of funding being cut, and of course that presents a whole new landscape for us. And I did attend one of the workshops that was about Medicaid and Medicare and anti-hunger programs and anti-poverty programs, and how these are quite critical to lifting folks out of poverty and keeping them out of poverty. And we want our citizens to be earning a living wage and being good, strong consumers within our local economies. And a lot of the cuts being proposed at the federal level are really threatening those programs. A lot of folks in poverty are the working poor, and these are the kinds of cuts that are might quickly propel them into deeper poverty, and that's certainly not the way we want to go. So yeah, you're dealing with unfunded mandates and cuts and a number of things that make it very challenging.
So obviously when you get together as a group, it's not just a here's the problem type of presentation, but let's look at possible solutions. What are some of the things that we're bandied about?
Yeah. So one of the narratives that gets talked about at these kinds of meetings, and that I often like to try to bring up, is that this narrative of slashing spending to balance a budget. I mean, yes, we do need to talk about spending, and we need to be cautious, and we need to be smart in where we invest dollars. And I think this budget, and I think this administration has made cutting spending a priority, and actually consolidated programs, and has cut out some waste, and we're happy to see that, of course. But one of the other things we want to talk about when it comes to fiscal responsibility is revenue. I don't think we have a spending problem. I think we have a revenue problem. And by that, I mean that, the Pennsylvania property owner and the small business community have been the ones to really shoulder more and more of the tax burden at our state, in our state budget. Even while the corporate sector is actually seeing less and less of a tax burden every year. Some 40 years ago, the corporate taxation burden used to be about 30%, used to provide about 30% of the revenue. Well, that's down to 15% now, which means, as we all know, that it falls to the taxpayer, and the small business community, I might add too, has really suffered in that dynamic.
Yeah. Okay, so some of the solutions that they were talking about, obviously, looking at revenue funding formulas would be one of the things that is certainly talked about and discussed. The prospects for change are probably dependent upon who is actually leading the state government, this being an election year.
Correct. It really does. And of course, when you think about that, we just, as a taxpayer, as an elected official, as someone who works with anti-poverty programs, we all just want to see people work together. And we know we need to put the priorities on people, and I think that's happening. I'm pleased. We want to. This budget talks about actually lowering one part of corporate taxation, but also talking about how to remove the loopholes that have allowed almost 71% of our multi-state and multinational corporations to almost completely evade taxation. And that has hurt us. That has hurt our children in terms of how that gap has had been made up by decreasing education funding. And it's hurt our rural areas. We have, in the rural areas, have felt a disproportional amount of our property taxes being increased. So that's one thing, is corporate taxation. The other thing is, in Pennsylvania, we have a very regressive income tax situation. We actually have a situation where the upper income earners are paying less of a proportion of their earnings in taxes as compared to the lower income groups. So that's one thing that is being talked about a lot. And there's some proposals out there that talk about property tax elimination, but also talk about it in a way that corrects some of these inequalities in how taxation is done. And one of those bills is Senate Bill 555, which talks about fair tax solutions. So that was a discussion that was held at this budget summit. Very interesting. Property
taxes are such an issue in Pennsylvania because there are so many different regional areas which view property taxes as rather a great priority or no priority at all. And those border counties that are right along state borders, they're very, very much interested in not changing the property tax formula at all because, well, people can go across state lines and all of a sudden it's a whole new tax situation.
Yes, that's the problem in Pennsylvania. Is it a large state and a very diverse state in terms of socioeconomic and just even, traditions and values and all of that. And so it is difficult. And that's, I go back to, we all need to work together and people need to listen. But in the end, we need to invest in our public education system and our workforce and in our human services. Those are areas where you get a return on that investment. And everybody knows that, we all know that, but we really need to, think outside the box, come up with a solution.
As you just said a couple of moments ago, there are jobs out there, and we're having a workforce problem because the jobs that are there, people are not trained for, they're not educated for, and those jobs remain unfilled. You have to bring in people from other states for them. And the cracker plant is going to be a big, big example of that.
Truly is. And, we took our eye off the ball a little bit, and as you know, due to budget recessions and all sorts of pressures on budgets, and we sort of got away from career and technical education and from the trades and those kinds of things. But I'm happy to say there's a lot of folks talking about those issues, and that is part of this budget, is a real emphasis on manufacturing jobs, on career and technical education, on our trades, getting people educated for those kinds of careers.
She's Sherene Hess, Indiana County Commissioner, talking budget with us here this morning. Thanks so much for making that arduous journey across the street, standing at that light, waiting for that light to change while the wind is howling and everything isn't the easiest thing in the world.
It builds character.
It is Indiana in the Morning, presented as always by First Commonwealth Bank. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160.